Hello everyone and welcome back to another Tuesday, another API review. We have a ton of issues today, so we'll try to get through them. So again, some of you were not here last time, so given where we are right now in the release cycle, we kind of want to just review stuff, not design stuff. So if your stuff is contentious, I'll do my best to capture the feedback and then just bump it back to needs work so we can review more issues rather than trying to solve your particular API design issue in this meeting. Mostly because it's not a good use of everybody's time. It's just a good use for you, but not for everybody else. So we try to optimize for everyone at this point. Yeah, so then the agenda that I put together was kind of a combination of what I felt critical plus easy. So we have the more complicated stuff towards the end. Unless there's objections, I would start with the HttpClientFactory, so long someone can talk to that.
Yes, please. And thanks. It's great that like we can go first because we are in Europe, so
yes,
the time zones. Thank you for accommodating that. Okay, so about the HttpClientFactory and KeyDI. So in 8.0 we've added KeyDI when you can resolve the services by name, so you can have several different implementations of the same interface registered by different name. And it was technically similar to what HttpClientFactory is doing with the clients, though it was created long time ago, and it just makes sense to be able to get the clients from API as well, basically integrate that's happened. Sorry. And to be able to use these two features together, and last year we even tried to do the integration like by default, like it would just work. And unfortunately, it could not just work, but because there were tricky stuff like not all containers that support KeyDI abstractions, not all of them support keyed services. And one of the examples was that even if we just register a keyed service there, when Autofac would import the service collection, it would start crashing. So we're like, okay, we need some kind of opt-in API for that. But now that the time comes, and we were thinking that eventually, maybe next release, we would still like to move for it to be on by default. So we would need an opt-out API as well. And also, even right now, there is an API called configure HTTP client defaults, where you can put stuff that will be applied to all HTTP clients for every name. And you can say there, I want all my HTTP clients to be keyed, registered as keyed. And then you can opt out for a specific client. Or vice versa, you can say, I do not want any of the clients to be keyed services, but this specific one I do. So this is achieved transparently with the API, just works with HTTP Client Builder. So you can call it both with ordinary add HTTP client and with configure HTTP client default. So the main point is whether we want to follow what service collection APIs are doing, is that they have a separate method for each lifetime. They have add singleton, add keyed singleton, add transient, add keyed transient, and it kind of increases the API shape quite a lot. And we are not in that API surface anyway. It's like when we call add HTTP client and then we call methods on it, it's what you are adding to HTTP client itself. It's like the APIs like add HTTP message handler, set handler lifetime, configure primary handler. So we could not follow like exact same API pattern anyway. So the closest thing that would make sense is the one that I've put in the main proposal. It would be add as key scoped, like add HTTP client dot add as key scoped. If we can scroll a bit down there in the usages, and as the pair to opt out would be remove, like add and remove.
Sorry, I have a very simple question. So when you call add
Yeah.
HTTP client that passes in a name, isn't that already the indicator that you want to opt into a named HTTP client? Why do you also need the add as keyed?
So the thing is, when it's already how HttpClientFactory worked for all these years. You would say add HTTP client and name, and it would not register keyed service. So if it suddenly would, you can have the problem that you've just updated and then your application started crashing and it wasn't before. This is one point here. And
so
the second point
what you're
is
saying, the
that
named HTTP client, this is not the key, we just retrofitted the named thing to be keys. Is that kind of the...
Yes, it is not the key. Yes,
Gotcha.
It is separate from DI. It's actually like HttpClientFactory is basically a factory, so factory itself is registered in DI, but whatever clients it is creating, they are not actually in DI. They are.
So normally you would just import
by the factory.
Yeah, you would normally DI inject the factory and then call the factory with that name, and then that's how you get that particular. I see.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
That makes sense now. So, I mean, I understand the desire that you kind of want to say, hey, that is the intuitive behavior we want, but it's breaking. So we kind of want to have this, I guess, opt in for now and then opt out later kind of thing. The only thing that's a bit unfortunate, the way you propose it here, is you basically have an add and a remove. I don't think right now you have any sort of remove APIs on the builder. That seems like something that is very specific to this case.
On the builder, it is true, yes. This, like the main proposal was based on iService collection APIs.
Yeah.
To be like close to how it looks like for services that add scoped and then like remove all keyed or something like this. And it is true that there's no remove, there are mainly configure, blah, blah, or add. It's just No, there's actually remove all loggers, if I'm not mistaken. The thing is that it's just like one pair, and remove was just a good pair for add. But there were also other alternatives proposed. There were like the minimalistic one that just says S keyed. It looks very nice when it is located right after HTTP client to say add HTTP client.s keyed, and it looks very nice.
Yep.
It might be a bit confusing if it is after some other APIs, like add HTTP client dot add HTTP message handler and then dot s keyed, and like will the client be keyed or only the handler? So there's like, it is nice when the API is small, but and also in my opinion the most correct API would be that like set or like add keyed lifetime and disable keyed lifetime, because this is clearly what these methods are doing. They are the most bulky ones. And if you would like to see how the alternatives look like, I've put them in the alternative design section. I just wanted to put everything together like in the first part, so you could see how they compare to each other.
I mean, they're very verbose. I mean, it kind of makes sense from the point of view that this is what's happening. I mean,
yep.
I would assume that, so can you only do scoped, or can you also do singleton, or?
So this is the whole another another can of worms here. You would think that the best thing to have here, like the best thing that would align with what the factory is doing, is transient. And the thing is that HTTP client is idisposable,
right.
And the container just captures it, and if you call to get HTTP client several times, there would eventually be tons of them just sitting there and not doing anything. And
but in that situation, maybe I'm missing something. Today, aren't the HTTP clients that get produced, they wrap the message handler with dispose false? So they so dispose is a no-op?
This is a different thing. Like, yes, it prevents the actual disposal, but what the factory is doing is it waits for everyone using the client to drop the references to the handler, and only after that, like, the handler gets disposed, the handler gets garbage collected, and this is when the factory knows it can safely dispose it. But if the container holds it for the whole lifetime of the application, factory could never retain this handler. It's like it would be expired, it would not be given to new users, but it would sit there in the memory.
I very rarely see folks disposing of HTTP clients that are injected via DI. Are we saying that every single one of those, where they're not disposing of it, is it a bug that's causing DI to be problematic?
No. This depends on the lifetime and how exactly they've registered. If you put it,
I know if it's scoped, the DI system will dispose them, but if it's transient, yes, it won't, right?
So with the transient, it's exactly the same thing that happens with scoped. They are captured either by the scope or by the root scope if resolved in the root scope, and it waits until the very end, and then the DI disposes it. Because the logic was that the DI is responsible for creating it, so the DI is the one who's responsible for disposing it. We have the guidelines to say you never dispose anything that you resolve from the service provider. Like, let the service provider do that for you.
But even for
this
transient,
is unfortunate.
for transient, you're saying it stores them and disposes them?
Yes.
Oh yeah, this is a well-known problem with
that
CI.
would be a problem.
Yeah, it's. I just dropped an issue, which of course it added in the chat for those of you not watching online. 36461. But yeah, it's a problem.
So then transient means really the lifetime is whatever the activating component's lifetime is, right?
Yep.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. It's just, yeah, when you do the singleton double, then bad things tend to happen.
The aligned problem is that we usually, for HttpClientFactory, we tend to say it's better to create a new client each time.
Right.
Because that allows the factory to rotate the handlers. But I would not expect the users of the KDI to do this a lot, because like if you are going to go to service provider each time you need the client, it's like you can use the factory then. It would look better. So I would assume they mostly would inject the clients everywhere. If it's transient, it might be another problem that the instance is captured by the singleton, and as a result, the handler is not rotated because you are not requesting a new HTTP client. But this is already an existing problem because there is also so-called typed clients. So I rather people use the from keyed services there instead. So like now they can transform them in just ordinary services with the easy injection of the named client. But it was not possible before. So there is an ability to create your own class with the parameter of type HTTP client in the constructor, and then the factory would use activator utilities to create it and put the named client there. And this one is registered as transient, and we already had some asks to please change the lifetime to scoped for typed clients. We cannot do this anymore because we like how much it will help someone, that much it will break someone else.
Right.
I see Stefan raising the hand.
Right. So to clarify like what we're talking about today, and I think I'm just repeating what you're saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, just jump in. But like previously, you had to either inject in the HttpClientFactory or a typed client. You could not inject the HTTP client directly.
Well, you could inject the default client for like empty string. I'm not sure how much people actually use that.
Oh, that actually works if you do just add HttpClientFactory. Okay. And then that has all the same problems that we're talking about here, where you get this, because is it a transient registration today?
Yes, but then again, it's only one client for a specific name. If we do like enable all the named clients to behave in the same way, you have the problem increasing by the number of the named clients you have.
Right, but I guess today, if you injected an HTTP client into a bunch of different singletons, then you've rooted a bunch of those, at least for each singleton you've injected that into. Okay. Well, that clarifies things. I didn't know that about directly injecting HTTP client. I've always done the factory and singleton. All right.
For some reason, it registers a default client. It is very strange because why would you need a client that is not set up in any way? But that's this historical thing.
Wasn't the best practice to use the HTTP client in conjunction with services? So you say this service gets this instance, and then on the service side, you just inject the HTTP client. Wasn't that the way you were supposed to do it? I think that's what you mean by the typed clients, right? Where you say like for this service.
I guess what you mean is a typed client. Yes. I'm actually not very happy about the typed clients because they are too obscure. That's why I would love to give an ability to switch from them to from keyed services. So you could also control the lifetime of this typed client. So you can make it scoped and solve some problems for yourself.
I don't mean to be rude, but like we're already half an hour in, and like I think the problem here isn't the API, right? It's kind of we don't quite understand the design direction. Like is the idea to change the lifetime? Is the idea to keep the lifetime what it is today? And I think like for me right now it's hard to say like, you know, is this something we can improve, or is it something that just needs more work and more fleshed out? Like, okay, here's the lifetime and guidelines that we want to have people follow.
There is just kind of there was no lifetime, like HTTP clients were not registered in DI, and this is an ability to actually register them there. And to while we are at it, while I was speaking all this stuff about transients, this was this doesn't look like super serious problem that you cannot solve with the huge warnings. What I mean is that if there would be no APIs, there would be no keyed services. We cannot do that without the APIs. But if there would be APIs,
well, I mean, like as from an API standpoint, you have two options. Right? One option is you have an ambient setting that you say like, oh, starting with .NET 9, you get those, and then there's an ambient way to turn it off because you're using AutoFac or something else that crashes with those. And then you can say, yeah, over time, people have to no longer use that opt-in, right? The other mechanism you have is basically what you propose here, which is for every single HTTP client, you decide whether you want this to be exposed as a DI-able thing or not, right? These are really the two directions you can take. I don't really have a preference. Like this is kind of a domain system or the domain problem where you have to decide which direction you want to go. If you expect the vast majority of people to do add as keyed or whatever you want to call the API at the end, probably ambient makes more sense because then it's less typing for everybody.
So there is a configure HTTP client defaults exactly for that. You just do it once. It's applied to everyone. It's right at the bottom on the screen.
Sorry.
This guy here. Scroll, yeah. You just try that, and it's applied to all the clients.
Gotcha.
Do you have a preference on the opt-in versus opt-out? I mean, I guess opt-in is primary proposal. Do you prefer that?
Are you asking me or Natalia?
Natalia, are these being they're not being requested together, right? One's the alternative to the other.
So the thing is that once you have one, you might want to have another. First, why we still must have the opt-in API is that it allows you to change the lifetime. Otherwise, you cannot change the lifetime. You need to specify it somehow. And the opt-out just made sense because you can do something by default. Then you need to be able to change something per name. Then, if you opt in by default, then you opt out from the specific name.
Gotcha.
If I call .asKeyed scope and then immediately after I'll remove asKeyed, does that change anything? Does that basically make things scoped without adding the keyed services?
No, it like if we do this with the single client, let's speak about single client first. It would add the descriptor, and then it will remove this descriptor when you say remove it. Then you wouldn't have anything changed in the end in the service collection. But if you would do client defaults as keyed scope, you would have the any key registration, and then for opting out per name, you would need to track the names, and upon creating a client, given the key, you would check whether it was opted out or not. So with the defaults, you would be adding any key registration to the DI.
So they are like exact inverses of each other, basically. Like one does undo the other. So like maybe we could call it remove as keyed scope if we wanted to like approve both to make it clear that they're like.
This is what it is. Oh wait, I see. You mean scope? So initially there were like 3 or at least like 2 APIs: the keyed transient and the keyed scoped. And why would you need them per lifetime? That's why I actually, even though I left it as a main proposal, I prefer passing the lifetime inside. It looks more clean, and you wouldn't need to have several different methods for each lifetime.
I mean, if you feel strongly that scope should be what most people should be using, I think you probably want a method called add as keyed, and then you have an optional parameter that you default to scoped, right? Basically, that takes the lifetime defaulted to scope. People can change the lifetime then, but you know the most easiest line you can write then adds it as a scoped lifetime. That would be probably the way I would do it.
This is basically the alternative API I was talking about, but with a default parameter, right?
Sort of. I mean, like you said, set keyed lifetime, but I mean, it doesn't really talk about the keying at that point, right? Oh, I said set keyed lifetime. I guess that does both.
Yeah. It says about set keyed lifetime. There was also as keyed. Basically, all these names can be used.
And then, what's the difference between add and set? Like, why did you switch to set here?
Because when you were add as keyed scope, you are adding to the service collection.
Right.
But when you are saying, I want this client to have this lifetime, you're like setting the lifetime as a property.
But you still do both, right? Like, I mean, basically, because it's not just set lifetime, it's set keyed lifetime. So presumably that means you both set the lifetime and you add it.
It would add the service descriptor, yes. So if saying add as keyed is more clear, I'm okay with that as well. Having like add as keyed and the parameter lifetime.
I mean, I guess for me, it's just like, given that you named them differently, it kind of implied to me that you had different behaviors in mind. If you have the same behavior in mind, like I don't have a preference. I guess, as you said earlier, like it's a bit weird to have add on remove because you don't really have that concept at all in the builder today. I don't know, like set seems, I don't know how you would undo it then, but also you probably wouldn't have to undo it, right? Like you...
well, there is an undo method there. They're all in pairs.
One, right? Yeah, it's the disable one you have here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like I would keep it as simple as possible. Like rather than having enable and disable and set, I would probably just do add or remove at that point, even though that's something you don't have today. But I would also try to align the names. So I think add as keyed scoped is unfortunate. As I said, I would rather have add as keyed and then take an optional parameter that is defaulting to scoped, and then you can change it if you want. And if you don't, then you just get scoped, and then you have remove as keyed that just takes it out again.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So we still want to have a verb there, so we want to say add.
I mean, the question is, if you call add twice, right? Presumably that would be bad, but also you would register it twice, right?
Well, this depends. Currently, in my proof of concept, I am changing it, so it will not have lots of descriptors in the container, but I can implement it in a way that it would be just added.
Yeah, I would say for DI in general, like even though on the low level methods on iService collection are like add and triad, if you have something like add HTTP client, like typically it's calling triad internally on a lot of services that only make sense to be registered once. So it's not unusual to have like add methods call triad or whatever.
So you're saying it's expected that if you call add twice, the second one is a no-op is kind of normal?
It is pretty normal, yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And then I think it's also like, it's probably easier to understand that, you know, the default is we add it, and if you don't want it, you remove it. And then it kind of gels with your defaults API, I think, quite nicely. I think the question is, so ignoring the APIs for a moment, like what do you want to happen when people do file new .NET Core project? Would you expect, .NET 9 project, would you expect the default template to have the configure HTTP clients with b.add as keyed scoped, or is the behavior kind of built into the system that we always do add as keyed by default, and then people have to call .removed as keyed manually? Do you know what I'm saying?
So in .NET 9, I would expect this not to be on by default, because this would be breaking.
Okay, so then .NET 10, would you expect that to change via templates, or would you expect that to be in the system? That's what we do by default, and so there's no line in the project that has to do that. It's the person that upgrades from .NET 9 to .NET 10, they might observe crashes at that point, and then they are expected to do .removed as keyed.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Stefan, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it sounds reasonable. Like, well, you know, one thing that unfortunately we have already like discussed this before taking it to API review, and I think this is a good proposal. But yeah, I was just like, so are we talking about approving it with a separate service lifetime parameter then for the add as keyed?
Yeah, what I currently have here is this. And then the default is scoped.
And this only changes the lifetime of the keyed service, right? Does this change the lifetime of the HttpClientFactory itself?
No,
anything?
No, the factory is singleton.
Okay. Yeah.
From a naming perspective, what is the add verb in the first thing? What is it actually adding? It's just controlling how the other thing that you've already done behaves?
It actually adds a service descriptor into iService collection.
What happens if I call it multiple times?
Sorry?
I call it multiple times. .add as keyed, .add as keyed. Does it register multiple?
No, it's a no-op on the second call.
So if you do this with an ordinary DI, and if you say add multiple times, it's like you would add multiple registrations there. If you resolve, you would get the last one, like the last one wins. If you say add a keyed, transient, then scoped, then like transient again, transient would win. Unless you would resolve all, you wouldn't see that there were some other.
So it actually is adding.
Yeah.
And this is assuming, sorry if this was already said and I missed, this is assuming that you want to use the existing name that was supplied as the key. Is that always going to be the case, or is there any situation where someone would want to override and use a different key name?
I don't see why they would need that. They can just go and register their own key in services in this case. Like you can go and call yourself services that add key transient and inside resolve HttpClientFactory and return a new client from there. So if you want to, you can do this mapping there.
Yeah. And on a more basic level, you supplied the key to your call to add HTTP client.
Yeah.
So unless you want like an alias, in which point you can do what Natalia said.
You didn't supply the key, you supplied the name. That's the whole purpose of this, right? Is that it was never the key. Now
right, but now it is. Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, if you want an alias.
I mean, I think for sanity, I mean, you could imagine people want to do this differently, but like, why would you want to do that to yourself? If you already have a name, you know, that's the key.
Yeah.
If you don't like the name, change the name. I mean.
Yeah.
So presumably what they would have to do today, they would have to DI inject the HttpClientFactory, right? And they would say factory.getClient for foo, right?
Yeah. So in this example, they would have to inject the factory and call it twice, once for foo, the second time for var.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense too. So really what it does, it just creates some syntactic sugar for those people and we make it opt-in.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
For now, some people will be very sad that it's opt-in rather than opt-out, but hopefully in .NET 10.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, like, I mean, you control the template. I mean, nothing really prevents you from putting the global registration into the template, right? I mean, you could just do this, right?
Yeah.
And then if you basically create a .NET 9 app, you get the behavior by default.
Yeah, it's not that big of a deal in my opinion. But there were some vocal people in the comments. But yeah.
They're only vocal until they realize that their shit doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Then you'll get more vocal people saying they've been broken. I think we struck the right balance here.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry it took so long.
No, I mean, it's complicated.
This
subject.
is actually
it's
not so bad compared to some of our other areas.
All right.
Thank you.
Tag list and measurement. Tarek, I think that's you, right?
Yeah, Emma, we have Martin around here. I mean, so can we review first the log buffering one? It's
Absolutely.
104.129.
As soon as I can grab the handle here, because the toolbar is unfortunately the way. Here we go. That's the one.
Yes, this is a log buffering. Martin, do you want to talk about it or you want me to talk about it?
Go for it.
Okay. So, yeah, this proposal is proposing to have some abstractions for log buffering inside the runtime. The actual feature itself, the log buffering, is going to be implemented in the upstream in the extensions library. I mean, in the extension repo. It's not in the runtime. But to support this feature, I mean, we have to expose some abstractions to support the whole feature. So basically, the log buffering is the way that users can configure like their logging, and when enabling this buffering, instead of every time you log something, instead of logging to the actual destination, it will be buffered in the memory and it will be kept for like some specific time or so, and later the user can decide about, like, you know, when, if we need to flush the cached logging or buffered logging, or just, like, you know, send it back to the destination. So the whole feature here is around, like, is going to be implemented, as I mentioned, about, like, you know, in the extended logger, in the upstream extensions. So in this logger, about, like, you know, it will have like the list of log providers, And every time, I mean, like, you enable the buffering, so this logger will go through the provider and check about like if this provider supports buffering. If it does, so it will buffer the stuff instead of calling to log it to the destination. And later, I'm about like this extended logger. When time expire or something like this, I mean, like it will call back, I mean, the provider again and saying like, here is what is the buffer if you want to log it. But I mean, to have the extended logger to check about if the provider support the buffering or not, we are exposing this abstraction interface, which is if the provider implements this interface. So this means that this provider is supporting buffering and it can work with buffering. And this interface is what we are proposing here. Is it just interface? It will be residing inside the Microsoft extensions logging abstractions, and basically the interface, it has just one method. It's calling like log records, and log records. This method actually is what is going to be called after to flush the buffer stuff. So basically about like, if you go to the scenario about like, if I have some log provider and logging something, it will go first to, and this this provider is supporting buffering, it will get buffered first in the memory for some time. And later, I mean, like, if you want to flush this buffer stuff, so you will call this method inside this interface, which is log records, and it will pass the list of all buffered records during the buffer.
And the key is the current log infrastructure assumes that by the time you hit the log provider at the bottom, the ambient state of the process is still around because logging is done synchronously. Here, since we're capturing the state, so here in particular, we're capturing the state in an infrastructure and sending it down to the logger later. So we need to snapshot a bunch of environmental state in these log buffers, log records to send down. And then the other thing is, you see in the data structure that's off the bottom of the screen there, everything is abstract. The idea is that the implementation of this stuff, the data that's captured in memory, the buffered state, probably won't be in one of these structs. It's a denser format. So as we're sending the log records down, we can expand the data on the fly, basically by implementing these properties as functions.
So my understanding is one of the goals here is to have pooling for these buffered log record instances, but there's stuff on it that can't be pooled well, like formatted message. Was there any consideration for having that also be something that was reusable, or does that not really matter?
How would you?
It's formatting into an array, or a memory of char or whatever, so that you had your own backing store. You could pool the backing objects, or whatever. Is that overkill? Is that not useful? Is that useful?
You mean rather than giving a string, you basically have a method to override that says, give me the message, and you pass in a buffer?
Or give it a span, make it a span.
And yeah, you basically are like, this could be backed by array pool char, right? Mm-hmm. And then you rent an array, you format into the array, and then when the buffer log record is returned, you can release the array back to the pool.
It's overkill because the log infrastructure itself, the iLogger doesn't do this. So
no,
in
I
order
understand.
to produce this array of pool, I would need to format to a string and then.
Well, but here the logger itself is implementing iBuffered logger, right? So it gives us an opportunity for the logger to do something else.
No, the iLogger has a callback function that does the string formatting and returns a string object. That still ends up getting used in this case. So yeah, I conceptually, you're totally right. From a practical standpoint, we're going to be dealing with strings, so we might as well just keep them around.
So, and there's no opportunity here, or no, it wouldn't be worth factoring that in as well. Some kind of v2 of the thing that does that formatting. Just not used, not okay.
Not immediately.
It depends if we need to change the internal implementation of some loggers, like console logger or something to work with buffer this stuff. But
don't we? I mean, we do, don't we? Don't we implement iBuffered logger on console logger and whatever else?
Yes, we are going. The plan is to implement iBuffered logger on the console one. Yeah, but this is the beginning. Yeah.
That was my other question, because it seems weird that we don't ship an implementation of this at all.
So the PR that adds this also adds support to the built-in loggers to this functionality.
And then so the built-in ones that we ship, like the console one, presumably then the console, like who is on the hook to implement buffered log record and calling the log records thing? Is that then the console logger itself?
No, that's .NET extensions.
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding from having asked these same questions on the issue is basically the loggers themselves implement iBuffered logger and are handed the collection of records that have been buffered by the component in .NET extensions, which is creating its own buffered log record derived type. So it's basically something is getting injected into the middle. When you're calling log, something from .NET extensions is sitting in the middle, is storing those into some list, and then at some point it passes it along to the underlying logger that it's basically wrapping. Is that
exactly?
Yeah.
So for all the users, it's basically transparent because they're basically at the leaf, and then the thing in the middle is any component that does logging, like HTTP client, would do something smart here. Is that the idea?
No. So this is application level control. So. Okay. The application is going to see a regular iLogger. All the infrastructure in the systems just calls iLogger.
Mm-hmm.
The implementation of iLogger inside of the .NET extensions code will choose to buffer some of these log records on the side based on the configuration of the application. So the application might say, all logging statements coming from component X, don't send them out the wire, just buffer them in memory. And then the application will have logic that says, if an error has occurred in component X, then dump its log records.
Gotcha.
So nothing in the system changes. We'll be adding APIs in .NET extensions to turn on this buffering, flush the buffers, and there's going to be a little configuration support to like how big is the buffer and that kind of stuff.
And where does this API live?
That'll be a .NET extension.
Gotcha.
So when you add, there's already dedicated APIs to add redaction and enrichment, and this is going to be another API in the same family that's adding buffering.
And it'll be adding in a way where when you request an iLogger, you're actually getting the one from .NET extensions, which wraps the one that you configured as console or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So the loggers are all there's always the system iLogger that then calls to a bunch of registered iLoggers underneath. So the system iLogger is the guy that's going to do the buffering. So this is all the state we could figure out. That was needed. We chatted with the OpenTelemetry folks, and they suggested 1 or 2 more fields. It's all there.
String exception. We don't actually have the exception object. We only have a string representation of it.
Yeah, because this is kept for a long time. Mm-hmm. So at some point in the login infrastructure, somebody calls toString on the exception object. So to serialize it somewhere. So we're just moving that up. toString is going to be called up at the top, so we don't need to keep the exception object around.
Yeah, we cannot keep the exception object because it can be mutated. Like if somebody rethrow it, so it will be mutated. And when we flush the buffering, it can be in different state and it will be wrong logging. What get logged, it will be wrong. So we
I
have
do expect to have an option that says how to serialize the exception. So like include stack trace, for example.
Yeah, but one of the goals here though is to only pay some of these costs when an exception when an error occurs that you actually want to force logging to flush, right? So presumably you wouldn't actually want to have to pay for exception.toString unless the flushing happened.
So that's a CPU. So the intent here is to save on telemetry cogs in the backend. So log less stuff to the backend. We're trading doing a little more work and using more memory to get those backend savings. Right. So the buffering itself costs some cycles. We need to do pattern matching to decide whether we're going to buffer a record or not. But the idea is that cost is much smaller than what we're paying for the telemetry in the back end. So exception is a similar thing. I think I would presume that most of the time when an exception has occurred, you'll want to flush those buffers.
What I don't understand is, like, are we talking about deferring the cost or saving on the cost? Because ultimately it seems like you record everything, so eventually you have to do the toString anyway.
Well, but it's presumably it's a circular buffer, so you're only keeping track of the last n things that happened and then flushing the last n things that happened when. So you're not actually storing all of history.
Gotcha.
Exactly. But that's the thing. If the theory is correct, typically when you have an exception, you would flush the buffer.
Mm-hmm.
Then anytime we call toString, it's useful work.
And I guess if you really wanted to, with this being a virtual method, you could still have the buffered log record store the exception and only produce its toString if we wanted to implementation wise when it was accessed. So you could still do it as an implementation. Yeah.
Exactly.
But not the same. I guess getting back to my question for formatted message, you couldn't do the same for formatted message because we can't necessarily hold on to the arguments array.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's a similar for the exception. We can't really hold on to the exception object.
Yeah, that one's a little more squishy, but yeah.
I mean, I could see for specific logs, if we introduce a new API, you could be like, these formatted message arguments won't be mutated. Same with the exception, but
And
what does it require a new logger API? Oh, sorry.
If you wanted to extend the base exception object to have a toString that takes a span, and we could potentially take advantage of that. At least.
It's probably at the bottom of our priority list.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the attributes thing at the bottom?
I think that's just logging infrastructure stuff, right? That goes to OpenTelemetry.
That's all the name value pairs associated with a log record. Right. So the T state of a logging statement typically has a name value pairs coming in. So that, and usually that'll be the enrichment values. So a region name, cluster name, that kind of stuff. So again, those are all things we need to serialize up front because we can't hold on to them over time.
Right.
So.
But you're holding on to the object, right?
It's expensive. It's expensive. We're doing a lot of work here to save the cost in the back end.
And those costs in the back end are massive.
Oh yeah, hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
I mean,
we're between $500 million and $1 billion a year in our logging infrastructure.
I mean, as a shareholder, I'm concerned. Isn't the idea that the customers pay more money? Isn't that?
No, this
Anyone
is
watching the live
costs.
stream, Emo is joking.
But yeah, just in our organization, I think it was $250 million a year in telemetry.
Jesus.
Most of these mostly logs. So the vast majority of log records are never looked at.
Right.
So this is intended to cut that down. So there's also, we're going to save storage costs and transit costs. So there's a point where encoding all this stuff on the wire and sending it out, where we're not going to do that, is going to compensate for some of the cost of buffering this stuff in memory. Right? So the cost is not too extreme. I expect it to be fairly. It's not zero, but it's not going to be dramatic either.
And I think probably, hopefully, last question. The things that are nullable, that's just because some implementations of buffered log record might not be able to provide them, like managed thread ID or like message template. That's just because they may not be available, so you have to expect that you get back null.
Yeah. So, well, the idea is in the controls, you can say, I want to buffer this and not that.
I see.
So it's a memory consumption thing, and potentially this just doesn't exist right now thing.
So the message template should always exist, right? Or is that not necessarily true? No. The formatter.
No,
okay, sorry.
It can be null.
Yeah.
And in fact, for structured logging, we're recommending it to be null. Just log name value pairs instead of formatted text.
Perfect. Okay, and then with attributes, is that pulling in like stuff from the logging scope and the T state passed into log, or is it one or the other? Or
no, I mean the scope should be handled by the formatter. I mean, so I expect like the implementation while buffering the log record. I mean, it will call the formatter to format the formatted message, and I expect the formatter will handle the scopes at that time. So
okay. So there's nothing about scopes in here. This is just it ends up in the formatted message or not. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Sam?
One of the things coming down the pipe from OpenTelemetry is desire for an events API that has more structured data, and I'm wondering whether we need to have some. We're kind of defining everything as strings here, where they want to use any values in the future. Are we limiting our future selves, or can we just do we just end up shoving everything into attributes, or derive another derived version of this for those cases? And those loggers can be smarter.
This abstract class can be extended in the future. So nothing, And anybody, I mean, like, of course, I mean, like, I'm not expecting anybody will implement the buffering by themselves. I mean, except like big vendors. Yeah, and big vendors, I mean, like our extensions. I mean, this is one of the vendors. Like, they will decide about, like, you know, I've extended this one if need to, and implement whatever, I mean, like, needed there.
Sorry, back to the attributes thing. Like, who's supplying the attributes? I understand it's useful for like cluster ID, etc. But like, if it's not coming from the scope or the state.
So iLogger, the T state in iLogger by convention has an iRead-only list of string, object associated with it.
Got it.
So that's just serializing that this incoming stuff there, passing it down. And then one of the uses of these name value pairs are these enrichment attributes that are coming in.
All right, so that is the state, not the scope. Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Are we then cool with what it's look like right now, or do we need to make any changes? I don't think I heard any change requests.
Me neither.
One thing Stephen mentioned in the issue that the log records, I mean, should be enumerable instead of iRead-only test or not, but I don't have any strong opinion about it.
I mean,
if we're copying it anyway. Length is nice, right?
Our guidance is usually do not take something like iCollection or iList just to access the count. We are basically saying when you take in a collection, you should take an IEnumerable and then use the, for example, the link.try_get_count method if you really want to get the count. If you want to do something smarter, otherwise you just, you know, incrementally copy, because that's effectively what you do, right? You just add to your ring buffer, right? You're not holding onto the records.
Actually, maybe this should just be a span.
That works too, yeah. That would probably allow you to be slightly
That'd
smaller.
be a little more efficient, right?
Your memory would be continuous memory to just going to add span to include all records there? I mean,
Yeah,
like
so-
this will put some restriction on the implementation, I believe.
But it doesn't matter because the top level is calling the lower level code thing. Even if
Right.
the in-memory representation is fragmented, it doesn't matter. It'll just call log records multiple times with different spans. So that'd be the more efficient approach. Did we do that?
If that works for you, it makes me happier.
Spans are good.
We read only span, but yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess like the only thing is that formatted log values is no, I think span is good. Never mind. I take what I was about to say back.
I mean, span would certainly be the most efficient. It's a little bit constraining in what the higher level caller would do. An implementation of this, if this were IEnumerable, an implementation could type test it for an array or a list of buffered log record like we do in LINQ, and then, get a span from those, otherwise do the IEnumerable thing. That adds a few nanoseconds of overhead, which probably in the grand scheme isn't a big deal. The consumer, there's only some things you can get a span from today, but you can get one from a list and an array, which are probably the most likely things the producer is using.
And I suspect the implementation, the guy that's implementing this function is just going to be walking the list of records and serializing it into their IO buffers.
Yeah, I'm not taking a span. I think is totally fine for the implementation of iBuffered logger. I'm more speaking to what the code in .NET extensions is doing.
Yeah.
If it has an array, if it has a list of T, span is great.
Yeah.
Anything else might have trouble getting a span from it. But
oh, interesting. Okay.
Right. That's what I was going to say about formatted log values. It's like it's already a struct that implements this iRead-only list thing, so it's like convenient. But
this whole struct is made up of abstracts. So, okay, so if you use a span, right now everything is virtual. I don't need to have any data that looks like anything in this API. If we put a span in there, then I need to at least have an array, contiguous set of objects.
Yeah, same sizes.
for the holder of the buffered log.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have a sequence of them, like you said earlier. You could have something that you can get a span from each piece, right? You have basically a linked list of memory, and you get a span for each. But it's still having this be a span does constrain what the producer of the buffered log records, how it's able to store them.
Yeah.
Like if it was using just a queue of buffered, like a system.collections.generic.queue, we don't expose a way to get a span.
Yeah, so then I'd have to either send down spans of one entry or do some data copying to make myself a span.
Right. So that's where if you just took an IEnumerable, then the implementation of iBuffered log record could try to optimize for the case where it's given a T array or a list of T, but it's not constrained to that. It would have a fallback that said, oh, it's just, it's an I collection. Okay, I'll use copy2, or I'll use the IEnumerable and get enumerator or whatever.
Right.
I guess as an interface, this is going with IEnumerable is probably the more, I don't know, it's certainly the more flexible.
Right.
Works for me.
Do we want the buffered log record to be disposable so that you could have lifetime attached to it if you wanted to? Or do we think that's too far?
This is a synchronous method. So the consumer who owns the buffered log record instances they could have their own derived type BI disposable, or they can do whatever they want. Like the producer is creating them and owns them.
Oh, so the log records is not the thing. So the log records will immediately flush it out. Is that the idea?
It's not transferring
Exactly.
ownership of the buffered log record instances, right?
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I was under the impression that the iBuffered logger is the party that does the ring buffering. So that's why I was...
It is. And it's just been, it's basically, it's calling log records that say, here are buffered log records that I own. Please note them. When the call to log records returns back to me, I still own the buffered log record instances. You just extracted all the data from it that you needed.
Right.
So I would add that like 99% of these times, the state object is like a log values, which is like a struct that implements I-read-only list of key value pair of string object. So I mean, we already exposed it as an I-read-only list in like, you know, that's what we do for the T state most of the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, wait, are
you
talking about attributes now, Stefan?
Yeah, because the attributes come from T state.
Okay, I thought we were
Like-
talking about the argument to log record.
You roll back 5 minutes.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
All right, my bad.
So I guess my question was like, if you want the buffered log record to hold on to things that are pooled, for example, how would you do that? Like, when do you know it's time to return that shit to the pool?
So I own buffered log records. I have a queue. I have a circular queue of them.
Right.
I decide it's time for me to flush the underlying logger.
Right.
I call log records, handing my list of buffered log record. But I'm not permanently transferring ownership to log records. I'm just saying, here they are. And then when log records returns, I still own those buffered log records. The implementation of iBuffered logger has no right to keep referencing them.
That was kind of my question. So basically you're saying log records will take those records and write them somewhere in some fashion. So that means after the call returns, I can dispose them, destroy them, return them
Correct.
to the pool. Okay, so then yes, that makes sense. I was under the impression that the ring buffering happens, you know, underneath the log records thing. In which case, I would expect them to hold on to it.
Oh, it's
it's above that. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Sorry, Tarek, you were saying something?
No, I was just adding about like we have to be clear in our documentation about like after returning from log records. I mean, yeah, users shouldn't tamper with the list we passed. Yeah.
I think the API docs actually.
So then I think the conclusion was we changed it to IEnumerable back, right? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's all. Right, are we done then?
I think so.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the patience. All right.
Can we look at the process time 104.844?
Totally. Let me just mark this as ready as approved here. So, all right. So,
Thank you.
and now we want to look at this one here, right?
Yeah, that's this one. Yeah. So basically, we are working on exposing some runtime metrics, I mean, from system diagnostic source library. And this metrics will be reporting the stats of different things inside the runtime, like GC stats, I mean, jet stats, thread pool, and other stuff. So one of the metrics that we are reporting will be the CPU time, I mean, including the user time and the privilege time. And currently, I mean, to report those, we have to call process.get current process and the property, I mean, like processor user time, or processor privilege time. But this means that inside the system diagnostic source library is going to be depending on the system process library, the other library. And this is causing two problems. I mean, first problem is creating cyclic. So there will be cyclic dependency on that if we do that. And the second problem is like adding more dependencies from diagnostic source library is going to increase the size, which would be a concern for AOT builds, because diagnostic source library is low level, and we expect it will be used most of the time. So this would be a regression in the size for the AOT. So the idea here, the proposal here is we need to expose the same functionality. Instead of having it inside the system process library, we need to have it inside the runtime itself. The system runtime, which is inside the proposal is proposing to have it inside the environment class.
Right.
So yeah. So the idea is like we have two alternative design also, but I prefer the first one. So the first one is just like to have a static property inside environment. We call it CPU usage, and this will return the process CPU usage, which is include the user time and privilege time of the process, of the current process. And this will have exactly the same behavior as we have in process class. So nothing will be changed in the behavior. The alternative design is just like instead of returning both at the same time, we just return every one separately. So we'll have two properties. But I'm still preferring the first proposal because like I'm expecting most of the time users who are interested to get this metrics, they need both the user time and kernel time of the CPU. Yeah.
So on process there are separate properties, right? So
yes, that's right.
So normally I would say I would prefer a type if you need to get them in conjunction because they are not independent values, right? So in other words, if you call them as two different calls, then you might get values that don't add up anymore, right? So this is the whole thing that we did with GC statics, for example, statistics, where you have one struct that returns everything, right? And then you know that all the values are self-consistent, right? But in this case, if they are effectively equivalent to calling the properties on process, then it doesn't sound like there is any consistency argument to begin with, so you might as well make them two properties on environment, which I personally prefer because it means one less type in the system namespace.
Yeah, I agree with you. The only thing is like I didn't look at the actual implementation we have today in the process class. That are we using just one API to return the both? From the OS, interop with the OS, is it just one API reporting both or just two APIs, calling twice? So if we're calling twice, so it doesn't matter at the time if we separate the values because like we are calling in different time anyway.
Right.
But I prefer the first proposal. I agree with you.
If you're getting both values, we if memory serves, we at least on Linux we make two. Well, because we don't cache the data on the process instance. So every time you ask for the data, you get back a value, which means that we're necessarily making. If you ask for both user time and privilege time, we're necessarily doing the work twice effectively. The advantage if it was common to ask for both of them at the same time, there's a performance advantage to having them returned together because I believe in both Windows and Unix, or at least Windows and Linux, I don't remember Mac, we can do the work with sort of one interop operation. Whereas if we had two separate properties, we'd basically be forced to do it twice if it was common to care about.
Right. For this specific feature we have metrics runtime. Most of the time both values will be reported. So I expect both values will need it at the same time.
Meaning aren't we creating two separate instruments for each of these values, each of which is retrieving the value, or do we do it in some way?
Yeah, it's two different instruments, but yeah.
So each of them will be making the relevant call. So from the metrics perspective, they could be there'd be no advantage to the metric.
That's right.
Yeah. So what's the behavior on iOS and tvOS where the system diagnostics process one is currently listed as unsupported?
We will mimic the same exact behavior of process. So we are not changing anything in the behavior. So if it's not supported in iOS, it will not be supported here.
Yeah, so we just bubble up the attributes basically, which is fine.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like, so I would lean then towards 2 individual properties. If we really cared, I mean, we could eventually add a get user and privilege time method that returns a tuple, for example. In which case, you know, because of the name of the method, you return 2 values, you know, the order in which they're in. Seems fine.
Are there other times we might want to add, like total time, which I believe is also something that exists on process, in which case the more of these we have, the more
that's fair.
Useful it is to have them grouped.
That's a good point.
I don't know if that's a thing we care about, but
I mean, even at that point, I think I would still prefer having more members than having a type, to be honest. Because it does seem like a fringe thing, and you put a type in the system namespace for it, it seems really heavyweight. I mean, we could probably make it a nested type, but then you have all the other problems of nested types, so I don't know.
And at least on Linux, total is simply the user time plus the privilege time. Like, it uses the one called a stat, but it just does the add together in the property. So yeah, you'll be off by a few ticks, but who cares? Meaning just call the 2 properties that exist.
I mean, if we have a method that returns a tuple, then that thing on Linux could do this in one fetch, and then they would add up perfectly.
On both Windows and on Linux, it's possible. Like on Windows, I was just looking at it. We make a call to basically, we make a single call to get both values. On Linux, we use procfs, so we basically read the stat file and we parse out the relevant thing. So it's definitely cheap. If both values are going to be retrieved, it's definitely cheaper in both cases to do it in one go.
Yeah.
But cheaper here is also pretty relative. Querying anything about the process is expensive, even in C and C++, like where you've got the direct system call. It's expensive, and there's no getting around that.
No, I agree, but it's a question of, are you doing it once or are you doing it twice? Are you paying that expense once or twice?
It sounds like you're making the same argument, because you're saying it's very expensive. Well, then 2x that is worse, right? I mean, honestly, like we could just have a method that returns a tuple. If you don't care about one element of the tuple, don't read it, right? Like it's not, which is more or less what this API with a type would do as well.
Okay, and in the future, if we got like other case like the total time that Steven mentioned, we will have a new method there or new property or whatever.
Yes, I mean that would be the consequence. I mean, if it's literally just user time plus privilege time, I would also say you can write that plus yourself. If it gets more nuanced, which is basically where the GC stats went, then I think you eventually pay for the type. But I mean, given how old process is, and given that we never added to it, I think it's just those 2 values.
It's the user time, privilege time, total time, and then there are other times, but they're not related, like exit time and start time.
Gotcha.
Separate from this, we've been slowly over the last few releases effectively moving surface area from process to environment for things that are specific to the current process. You can get a process object for anything, but the process.get current process, we added process path, we added process ID, now we're adding process time. Like, we might want to have a more holistic effort to look at what else we want to do and kind of do it.
I mean, the problem seems to be though that almost all of those things are one-offs, and they're like if you basically add a type to hold them all, then you again pay the price potentially for more than you care about.
Oh no, I didn't mean create a type to hold them all. I meant we should look at make a holistic effort to audit the things on process that we might want on environment, and actually have a feature exposing all those things rather than doing it one thing at a time.
Gotcha.
It's separate. I'm pontificating, separate from this proposal.
That's fair.
I don't know. Personally, the only downside I see to having them grouped is the extra type. Otherwise, it's the right answer, I think, because you You can get consistent values. You do the work once. We can add things in the future if we want to, like a total time, even if total time was just summing the other 2 times. I would lean towards having the type. I don't care whether it's nested under environment or not, because I would expect if you only cared about one thing, the 99% case would be environment.cpuusage.user time. You're not going to ever actually see the type name. And if you do see the type name, it's probably because you care about both things. So I'd be inclined to have process CPU usage, or whatever we want to call it, be a nested type under environment and exist. But that's me. We could do the alternate design too.
Yeah, I mean, the downside of tuples is that, you know, adding is hard, right? In this case, it doesn't seem like super likely that we really needed something non-trivial there, so I think I'd be fine with the tuple, and then say if you really needed another one, you know, you just have an overload to that thing.
Of all the things discussed, the top tuple is the one that I hate the most.
So what would you prefer then, like the nested type or the...
Either the 2 properties directly on environment or a nested type on environment. And then next would be a public type in environment, and last would be the tuple of time spans get user and privilege time. Like, it's just a weird... It's a weird thing to glom into one. We're only really even glomming it into one because we know that the interop call that we have to make for it is we get both pieces at the same time. That's total implementation, and not like when you do division and you want the remainder and the answer. Like, they're the same operation. Here's both pieces. This is just like, here's 2 pieces of data we got from the OS at the same time.
Presumably we want the thing equatable though, right?
If we're making a struct, it should follow struct rules.
Yeah.
I don't know why anyone would compare them, but it should follow struct rules.
I think
how you compare those? I mean, like, is it just like the total time of both of them to compare them and decide if it?
I mean, you just do field-wise comparison, right? That's usually what you do with structs.
Sorry, it has to be equatable.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah,
Okay.
that's what I meant. Then I guess nested is this?
Is it conceivable that anyone would be confused and think this isn't for the current process? This is like CPU usage since startup or something. Like, obviously, you know, that can be clarified in doc comments, and the type kind of clarifies that it's a process. But
I mean, it's an
would
environment.
we put process in the name? Yeah.
I don't know, like, it seems, I don't know what else you would, you're saying like since startup, but like, that seems odd.
I agree. I was just thinking aloud. So nested type is where the consensus is going.
Yeah.
Is the word usage is better than if we just use time there? I mean, like, it would be like the property is called like CPU time instead of CPU usage, and process CPU time instead of process CPU usage. I don't know. I mean, like, just thinking about.
Well, I mean, imagine that in a future world you get more Midori like specific processor tick count data. Like, well, that's not time, so now we can't put it on the CPU time struct.
Okay, that makes sense.
Any objections also exposing total time then? If we already have it on type. given that it's just return x plus y.
Seems fine.
Because then we at least have all of them. Going once, going twice.
Just the question from chat of should the property be called process CPU usage to avoid that ambiguity of is this talking about since startup?
You can't, because you have to decide what is the type name, what's the property name. You can't have the same name.
Because it's a nested type.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, we can go back to the original one, the tag list.
Sweet.
I'm productive today.
We try.
Okay, yeah, this proposal mostly, I mean, for performance to avoid allocations. I mean, we have this type measurement of T, which is used a lot by the metrics, and we already have this type already exists today, and the constructor for this type taking different types. I mean, like IEnumerable, taking params and so on. But we are most of the time recommending like tag list to be used if somebody cares about the allocation, if they have less than 9 tags, I mean, to use. And this because like tag list is already optimized for this purpose. I mean, so today, I mean, like if anybody using tag list and want to create the measurement, I mean, they have to use one of these constructors, which will cause allocation boxing.
Right.
And the whole idea here is like introduce this extra constructor, which is taking the tag list as n parameter, and this will just do the optimization and avoid the allocations. Yeah, that's mostly it.
And the tag list already exists, right? That's not a new thing.
Yeah. Tag list already exists today. And also the good news about like if we go with this proposal, I mean, like if anybody today creating measurement and passing tag lists, so they will get this optimization for free without changing anything.
And why do we pass it in as in?
To avoid the copying on the stack. I think we used n in some other place. I believe like in instrument.publish or something like this. We have the same idea, passing the tag list as n parameters.
I vaguely remember that every time we talk about in, the conclusion is it's wrong. So that's why I'm asking, are we really sure that that's the right?
Yeah, we already used it before. I try to point to where did we use it. Yeah. But for sure, we used it. I mean, like we have it in other places.
Oh yeah, tag list is mutable. Beautiful. I see. Okay. Yeah. Then that's most certainly the right way to do it.
Talking about tag list, but I see tar entry and tar reader.
Yeah.
Is the screen out of sync?
Yeah. Same.
Sorry. I clicked on the wrong thing here. All right, so then any opposition? Doesn't sound like it. Boom. One down. All right, tar entry. Carlos, you are up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this proposal is about adding a new property, a long property, to the tar entry class. This property would return the string position
of where the data of a tar entry begins. The reason we need this is because it's not possible currently to know where the data begins due to the way the logic that reads entries works. So as soon as we started reading an entry, we read all the metadata fields. Then we read, we wrap the data with a substream, and then we move the position of the base stream, the archive stream, to the end of the stream, and it starts pointing at the beginning of the next entry.
Mm-hmm.
And the folks that reported this are asking for this because they want more flexibility when handling tarballs, especially to allow concurrent access. And well, the field is already there. It cannot be modified. It's just a getter. There's no setter at all. And it's up to the owner of the stream if they want to manipulate the main archive's position in any way. So yeah, that's the basic idea.
Do we guarantee? So if I understand correctly, or is there a usage example here that shows
API usage?
Sorry, can you scroll down, Emo?
Yeah, right there.
So you're saying that the tar blobstream.read async line folks want to do that in parallel on tar blobstream?
Well, it seems they want to do concurrent actions according to the description here. An example of a current limitation that would be overcome by this would be the concurrent uploading of entry data from tarballs stored in Azure Blob Storage. So I guess once they have an entry, they want to access the data and start doing things with that data in parallel while they continue reading the archive. It seems they are very big tarballs.
I guess I'm trying to understand what concurrent usage here looks like and whether that's actually something we guarantee to support. Like what exactly is being used currently?
Maybe the example doesn't contain it, but bar entry offset in Blobstream is in the third block of code. That's where the start position is stored, and then it's used in the fourth block of code with a seek. And
we don't have it. What is tar blob? I don't know what that is. That's not our type.
No, it's not.
So what is that? Like what is that new blob client stream? What is it referencing? How does it relate to tar entry, tar reader? I don't know what I'm looking at.
Right. Well, it's probably their own type, and the basic idea is that they want to be able to read the data separately.
Understood, but like if this is a stream that is coming from system.formats.tar and they want to be able to consume that stream instance concurrently, like we would have to be doing special work to make sure that that is safe, because most of our streams are not safe to use concurrently.
I see. So if they own the archive stream and they want to access it via multiple stream instances,
what does it mean?
They only need to use the start position. They only need a start position value so that they can manipulate the other instance of the stream. That's not safe. If they have two instances of the same archive stream.
So you're saying they own the stream that contains the tar data. They're using tar reader to extract the position of each of the entries,
Yeah.
and it's their stream that they want to read from.
I think so.
Yeah.
Based on the description.
And
okay, so if it's
and-
their stream, I'm going to assume that they're doing something external to stream itself, because just in general, streams APIs don't, like, there's a position, you know, that it's very hard to use concurrently.
I think the right way to think about this is that with this property, what it allows you to do is basically use our tar reader to create effectively your own index into the data stream, right?
Okay. So if that's the thing, if they're just trying to use our reader to find the starting and ending position of each entry and in their own data, and they're on their own after that.
Yeah.
Other than the name of the property, which doesn't make sense to me, it seems fine.
Happy to change it. I'm bad with names. So yeah, they only need to know the start because they already know the length. It's all part of the metadata fields of the entry itself. So by having those two data items, they can use another stream, move the position as with seek as they wish, and read the data and manipulate the data of that entry separately, while they keep reading the entries of the rest of the tarball.
So length is basically the length of data stream. It does not include the actual tar entry header.
The length is well, they have the data stream. That's a field of tar entry. That's a substream that grabs the data.
Right.
And
so is length the same as data stream.length or no?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay,
The length of the data, they already have it. What they don't know is where the data begins in the main stream, because that substream is a wrapper. It's like a virtual stream that started at 0. But the archive could be really big.
I mean, at that point, I might as well just call it start. Then you have start and length, and it's basically both the data stream.
Yeah, so questioning that assumption. So looking at the implementation of tar entry, I see that it's like if there's a data stream, length is the length of the data stream. Otherwise, it's the header size.
No, not the header size. It's the length of the data stream that shows up after the metadata.
Well, is there always a data stream? Because like I'm looking at the code right now, and it's a ternary expression.
No, not always. Depends on the entry type. In which case, depending on those exceptions where there's no data, well, we could either throw an exception or we could always return -1. I'm more inclined to throw exceptions with useful messages depending on the case, and I put it right after the API proposal. For example, if the data stream is null, well, this new API would throw. If the archive stream is on SQL, we also cannot provide position, so it would throw. If it's a special metadata entry, we have 4. 2 of them are packed, and the other 2 are new. I mean, we could let them access the data, but it's up to them if they want to read it. I just added it as an option for throwing an exception there too, since it holds metadata.
Right.
Maybe we don't need to throw for that case. And the 4th case would be if either of the streams is disposed, whether it's the data stream itself or the main archive stream, and we also throw in this API.
Yeah, what is a bit weird right now is that if I access length, then
like tar entry.datastream.length.
Just tar entry.
No, just tar entry.length. So like maybe I don't know enough about tar, but like there is a ternary expression right there where it's like if there's no data stream, give me the header size.
Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same. The length refers to the length of the data after the metadata. Yeah, apologies. And it's part of the tar entry. That's how we know how much data to include in that substream, that virtual stream, after we read all the metadata and we expose the data.
But that's kind of the thing that confuses me, right? So like if you would say if the length property would have the ternary and say if there is a data stream, return data stream.length, otherwise return 0, that would make sense to me. But now you're saying in the else, if there is no data, then return the size of the header, which now means if you try to walk this tar entry thing and use the length and you add them all up, that no longer works, right? Because now you basically mix two different kinds of lengths, right? Which now means you can't really reason about the because now if you say if you expose this new property, right, and you say that property plus the tar entry dot length, that is not correct data anymore.
You'll need to look at the entry type. It's like JSON element. It's a single type that is like 8 modes, and the methods mean different things in different modes.
I guess you could make it well defined by saying, you know, the start property, if there's no data stream, is basically the start of the header, right? In which case, yeah, you always have data, and then if the entry is empty, your data stream is effectively the header.
No, that would be confusing because we would be wrongly telling the customer you have a valid stream, because we are, even if the length is 0 because we have no data after the metadata, if we give them the position of the start of the metadata and they add length somehow, they're going to think that they are going to read some data.
So I don't have any objection to what you're saying.
I'm suggesting that we throw an exception in cases where we don't have a data stream for that metadata, for that our entry.
I understand that. I'm just saying, from my point of view, like in your design proposal, that makes sense. I'm just pointing out that the current shape of your API and your behavior is not consistent with that statement, right? Because if you say, like, if the current implementation of length would throw when data stream is not null, if data stream is null, then that's consistent with that position. I think it's weird to say the length sometimes returns the data stream, sometimes the size of the header, because now you're conflating these two concepts. But then you're saying for the start property you don't want to do that. So that's the thing that I don't understand.
No, length would not return the start of the header.
So the length
of
the
number
header.
of bytes after. Length only returns the number of bytes after the beginning of the data.
But that's not what your current implementation does. The current implementation says...
You're talking about tar entry.length?
Yeah.
Yeah, that indicates the number of bytes that the data, the length of the data.
Can we look at it actually in source.net right now? Because like I brought this up, but like I'm not sure I completely understand it. But like it doesn't throw when there's no data. Yeah.
Yes, Steven shared it in the chat.
I guess basically what I'm trying to get at is like whatever you name the new property, I think the expectation is that that property is the start and then the tar entry.length is the end. But because of the way you implemented length today, that would be not a very consistent implementation. That's the only thing I'm saying.
It's not the end, it's the number of bytes after the start. It doesn't indicate a position, it's length. Length.
Sure, but
maybe the question, Carlos, is why does length return a value at all for something other than regular file?
Yeah, that's kind of
so for example, in PAX metadata, PAX attributes entries, there's actual data there, but it's like a dictionary.
Can somebody read it?
It's an
Can somebody read it?
Not well, yeah, because we actually return it. I mean, if the customer is iterating through the archive, we could end up returning them an extended attributes entry. So they could read it.
Right. When if the type is symlink, you're going to return a value from length. Right. How does somebody read whatever that data that has that length is?
In a symlink, I think the data contains the path of the target of the link.
Okay. So you're saying length is there, but nobody's supposed to read it. They're just supposed to read the link name property.
Yeah.
Right. Like this. If the only thing that you're returning is where does my header end and the data that length is talking about starts, I see no reason why it would throw. It would just be, here's the data. If you know what the file type is, go interpret it raw.
Okay.
Like, I can appreciate the throwing if it's nonsense. But if length is, there is some data after this record header, and this is how long it is, just tell somebody where the data starts and the format type, and now they can write their own content reader instead of just like maybe they maybe they don't like the way that you wrote link name. Maybe they want the raw data instead of manifesting the system string. Great.
Okay.
Let them do it.
I mean, let me rephrase my concern with the way it's implemented right now. Is like, to me, length is useless unless I know what the start is, right? Like what is length relative to? And in your current implementation it's sometimes relative to data stream dot start effectively, which is the new property, and sometimes it's the header start. And that seems very weird to me.
I don't think it's relative to the header start. I think it's relative to the header end. Like it's always relative to the header end. Just something after it might be data.
Sometimes it's relevant to the header start, and sometimes it's relevant to the header end. I think that's the point.
Yes,
exactly. It says it returns header size.
If there's no data,
it's
relevant to the header start. If there is data, it's relative to the header end.
Exactly.
Okay, I thought size was the size after the header struct.
Yeah, which is where the data starts, right?
Right, but that would mean that if it had no data after the header, then size would be 0.
Yeah, Carlos, is it the header dot size, the size of the header, or the size of the data after the header?
No, size is length of the data. It's just that's the name, the official name of the metadata field. So I know it's confusing, but I preserve the names of the spec.
So what does it mean? What does it mean to not have a data stream, but have length be non-zero?
Yeah.
Symlink.
Why
it doesn't have a data stream, but it has a link name property. You have to switch on the record type property.
Right. We would not return a data stream. We would not expose a data stream to the user for a symlink, but we internally need to still read the contents of the data to be able to know what the link is pointing to. And the data stream would be null for that tar entry.
Why don't we always have a data stream? Why wouldn't we have a stream for that link?
Because I assume we have a strongly typed entry that gives you the symlink target, right? So, which is a string probably, right?
Because try to remember. We don't always expose a data stream because for the entry type, just didn't make sense to give them that to the user. Only for regular files it would make sense. Or I think it's the only one, but there may be another one. But yeah, for the other data types, they had all the information available through the tar entry fields, the other fields.
Right. But that still means if that's the behavior you have, effectively if we add a property, then presumably that start property on the symlink entry would point you at the beginning of the contents of whatever the header.size is, right? So you could actually slice that and now access it as raw bytes, right?
Right. Yeah, that's sort of what I was heading. Is if I would assume start position would always return the location just after the header.
Yeah.
That means, well, it could be a bug. Then I would have to look at if it makes sense to still return tar header.size for for the return value of length of the length property of the tar entry.
But I thought we just said that header.size is how much data comes after the header.
Right, but if we don't want to confuse users for
too late.
I think I agree with Jeremy's point earlier. It's like basically start and length point to the data of that entry. Whether you can interpret that data, that is a function of whether you understand the entry, right? So if it's a symlink entry and the spec says, well, here's the bytes that point to the thing and it's a UTF-16 encoded thing, well then, yeah, that's the thing you have to parse yourself, right? But the thing is, you can use those start and length property to effectively build up an index for every single entry to say, here's the bytes that make up that entry, right? You don't have to understand the thing.
if I have an in-memory tar, if start is always where this record ends, and length is how far you need to go past that point to get to the next record,
Yeah.
then I could use that to go back to my in-memory thing as span instead of have to go through stream.
Exactly.
And I could do that for whatever reason I want to. If we're exposing always the length, just always expose, here's the offset of where this header record ends, which is what data offset is.
Yep.
Who cares what the type is?
There's still padding to calculate. So if you have the length after the metadata, we have to always match blocks of the same number of bytes. So,
sure. I mean, you know where you leave the header and the header padding, and you enter data for whatever the data is, whether it's a symlink or a sparse file or a block device. It looks like it always says size should be 0. So block device, either say, hey, this thing actually has no start, you can't ask for it, or it does what an empty array does. It's like, well, I'm giving you here's a place that the data starts, don't read it because it's not there.
It almost seems like, I would probably name the property just start. So you have tar entry.start, you have tar entry.length. So that's always the body of the entry, right? The data that is associated with the entry. If people ever cared about the header itself, I would probably expose header start and header length. And then you have everything you ever want, right? Then you can just literally create an index of everything. And then you don't need padding. Then you can just, the padding is effectively, when you walk 2 entries, how far are they apart, right? But you can compute that yourself.
I'd be happy with something like data offset.
Do we have to what, sorry?
Like data, just riffing on the names that Emo is sharing.
Yeah.
This is effectively the data offset of the entry.
The data offset's what I'm thinking as well. You're not guaranteeing, you're not saying what data is. What data actually means is a function of the entry type.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the data starts. It is the offset of the data from the beginning of the stream.
Correct.
Yeah, if length didn't already exist and we would expose data offset, data length, that would be perfect. But given that length already exists, I think it's a bit odd.
Yeah, I just feel weird with just like entry.offset. If you call it data offset, then it feels more clear that you're not saying when the entry started.
Is there a reason we prefer offset over start?
Data start?
I mean, I think offset implies that it's kind of an absolute position in the stream, but I guess you could say the same thing about start.
I was actually going to say the opposite. I think offset almost implies that there's like a relative position to something, and start is more absolute. But like, I think it's close.
Well, offset is relative to the archive string.
It is. I mean, everything's ultimately relative to something.
So here's a annoying question, Carlos. Is offset related to seek origin begin, or is offset here related to where the stream was when you passed it to our reader?
It would be relative to where the user started reading the archive.
Yeah.
So you're counting manually, you're not asking for stream position.
Well, that's a good question. It's an annoying question. Like you said, well, what should we do then? It should be probably, if we have access to the base archive.
Whatever the answer is, consistent with it. Presumably because you have non-seekable streams, it's going to be relative to where someone told you the data started.
All right, so then what do we call the property?
I mean, so saying now that it's relative to where you told the tar reader the data started, so that feels like offset.
So just offset?
Sorry, data offset.
Data offset sounds better to me. Yeah.
Again, I'd be concerned that our entry.offset makes it sound like where the entry header starts instead of where the entry or where the data associated with the entry starts.
Yeah.
Totally agreed. I mean, to the same vein, I could argue that, just with length, it does not include the header and the data segment, but we've already shipped that. So yeah, data length might have been a better name, but we are where we are. So yeah.
I think
Data
Mr. Tobe
offset.
said the same thing, and I silently nodded in agreement.
Yeah.
It's it's
Clearly,
analogous
we
to
should
what
mark
we had
length
with
as
Keep Archive.
Obsolete and tell people call data length instead.
I don't think we need to do that, but yeah.
I also like that in this definition, it's not a throwing property because throwing properties are always frustrating, especially in the debugger.
Okay. You said not throwing.
Because it's just returning what's the offset past the header. You don't care what the data type is. There's some argument for any of the ones that are supposed to have size 0, which looks like device, directory, FIFO, and link. Wait, wouldn't link have a size because it's the value of the link?
Yeah, it would have a length.
I'm just looking at process data block. It says data block symbolic link if size is greater than 0, throw.
I think it's if you can fit the link in the header, because there's the long path or long link where you do read that from the data.
Yeah, in those cases, in the GNU long link or long path, if it's not possible to fit data, we can continue in multiple entries, subsequent entries, and we then finally append it. But yeah, as long as we make sure, regardless of the data type, that the data offset is the byte after the ending of the metadata header, well, the user can determine if with the length and the data type, it makes sense to read that field.
Yeah, I think someone made the comparison to array earlier for these things with size 0. Like, I think returning the offset's fine. Like, don't read it. Just the length or size is 0.
So we cool then with what's on the screen right now? Only
sounds good to me.
Ship it.
Only I could do grammar. All right. So sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to give the 2-minute approval to removing a constraint?
To what?
Oh, never mind. You
Ship
opened it. I see it. Ship it.
Steven is gone, right? So do we have thoughts on this? It seems like an easy one. I think in general we are okay with doing these things. AKA dropping constraints.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest consideration is really just... Yeah, there's still constraints. Basically, this is just removing the constraints so that we can work with enum types.
Right.
If you were to pass like a GUID in here, it would throw because it can't work.
Right.
We could potentially expand the set of T in the future, but the biggest question might be, should there be some like is supported T property that is a unconstrained generic? That way we can query, is the concept supported? But I don't think that's really necessary. Interlocked's a pretty low level API already, and we can just document. It works with primitive types, enums, and reference types.
I mean, I think it'd be, if we wanted to add public static bool can exchange of T void, I think that'd be fine, but yeah, it's probably not necessary. I assume the constraint is T needs to still fit in one register.
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
effectively.
I don't think that the CAN API would add much, because basically you're implementing a data structure based on constraints, right? And there is no else you would write. You just wouldn't do that.
Is it actually architecture dependent, or is it something that could be statically known at compile time? Like, because I guess the only thing you're losing, right, is now if you use Squid, you don't see the error till runtime.
Right, and it's something that we could statically handle with an analyzer.
Yeah.
Is this going? So this is an actual question that actually changes my opinion here. Is it architecture dependent in such a way that a struct of two shorts will work on some platforms but not others?
Well, so this isn't just allowing any T. Like it's not going to allow any struct that happens to be 4 bytes. This is specifically to expand the set from what's supported today to also support enum, which is a primitive type that you can't express via constraint at all. So you still get the primitive types like long.
Is it right? So you're going to do enum and all the number types that back it.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Right.
Okay, but not quote anything that fits in a register, which becomes a question of how does the struct get passed on a particular system. So.
Right.
Okay.
But presumably you're still architecture dependent in the sense that a double will only be atomically written on a 64-bit machine, right? Or no?
It's you still get a correct compare exchange. Like long has to be emulated on 32-bit platforms, but it's supported via compare exchange today. It just has to fall back to the naive barrier compare loop.
Okay,
gotcha.
Right, as long as the T's are consistent across all operating environments on the same version, then I don't care.
Then I think we're cool.
Yeah, that's what I figured, because otherwise it's a massive footprint, right? But yeah.
Yep. Sweet. Then we're done with that as well. We still bumped Booyah, but my understanding is that this is in the category of nice to have, so I think it's the right thing. So we approved this one here, did we not? Oh, this is a secondary issue. Oh, that's the one we talked over in email. Never mind. Yep. All right, then thanks everyone, and I see you on Thursday.